We have officially concluded the first season of Daredevil Born Again, so let's talk about how perfect it was. It wasn't. This is such a weird finale because it almost feels like an apology for all the convoluted direction this season took. Like, they completely sidelined the supporting cast so we could have Punisher and Karen front and center throughout the rest of this one. I mean, good, but why couldn't we have had this the whole time? Like, Kirsten and Cherry were clearly supposed to replace Karen and Foggy, but they did a piss poor job at doing that. They certainly exist in this show, but they have no character at all. They don't have arcs, they don't have stories, they barely even have establishment. And quite frankly, I don't really want them to be a part of the show anymore if they're going to be this useless. Matter of fact, have Kirsten, Cherry, and Heather all get in a car and drive off into the sunset or off a cliff next season for all I care, because I seriously just don't want to see these characters ever again. They really mean nothing. But seriously, once this episode started, it hit me like a truck. Frank should have been Foggy's replacement. Foggy was a moral compass and a sound influence on Matt. Frank is the antithesis of every temptation to kill that Daredevil has ever faced. If you gotta kill off Foggy, then Matt goes into a dark place and you personify that struggle by putting Punisher in as the devil on his shoulder, tempting him to start breaking his no-kill rule. This makes the internal conflict manifest itself externally and would have made for far better storytelling than just having Matt stew around in his indifference and frustration for an entire season. Must say, Punisher and Matt fighting the task force was freaking awesome. Well, mostly. When they jump out the window to dodge the grenade, my girlfriend said, "Oh, well, there goes his apartment." And right away, I'm just like, well, I mean, not really, because grenades don't, blow up entire buildings or anything. It's not like that big of an explosion. As if on cue, the freaking apartment bursts into inferno. Like, do you understand how grenades work? Why would someone carry a bomb that is just as likely to kill themselves or their allies as it would their enemies? Like, a grenade is meant to be something that you toss and then you take cover and hide from the explosion so it takes out your enemies. There's no point in taking cover if it does that amount of damage. And also, I guess Matt doesn't really do a whole lot of fighting in this episode. This mainly just shows Punisher gunning guys down and going ape. And the violence was epic, to say the least. But consider this. Punisher is just dropped into the show out of nowhere and really serves no purpose. And I really hate saying that as much as I love Punisher, but the only other time in this season we saw him was briefly in episode 4 for like 5 minutes, and that was it. And even then, contextually, it didn't make sense. Now, obviously, we as viewers know Punisher because we've seen him in Daredevil Season 2 and The Punisher Show, but I have always believed that movies and seasons of television should have individuality, and Punisher's lack of establishment in this show hurts that. Not to totally derail or anything, but the best example of this I can think of is Batman vs. Superman. At one point, a bomb goes off and Superman gets blamed for not saving everyone or preventing the explosion from going off, but Lois Lane figures out that the bomb was packed into a wheelchair that was lined with lead. And even if Superman was looking for it, which he didn't know to, he wouldn't have been able to see it because he can't see through lead. Now, we as Superman fans know that Superman's X-ray vision cannot see through lead, but never once in Batman vs. Superman, let alone Man of Steel even, do they ever insinuate that he is restricted in this way. So setting aside all previous knowledge about the character and other media, that explanation might as well have just been plucked out of thin air as some other random excuse, because narratively, it does not make any sense whatsoever given the context. The same can be said about Punisher in here. Again, we already know all of his history with these characters in the previous shows and seasons. But in the context of Daredevil Born Again, as a character in this show alone, Punisher has never been established to know where Matt lives, be following these Punisher goons, been in communication with Karen, and all of this is just crowbarred in haphazardly. Had they ditched this original plan entirely instead of mashing it together with a bunch of reshoots to make their previously shot footage work, they could have developed this from the beginning to bridge the gap between this new show and the old seasons, and also establish Punisher as a character in this new show. Because while I agree it'd be stupid to start with Daredevil Born Again without watching the Netflix show first, there is a reason that this is Daredevil Born Again Season 1 and not just Daredevil Season 4. Overall, had they established Punisher and Karen from the beginning and developed them throughout the season, it would have been a lot more meaningful and made a lot more sense why they show up in the finale and are so heavily involved whilst sidelining everyone else. Back to the action, Punisher fighting the task force was cool. The brutality of him is still on display in full, and it's great to see that be carried over from his other show. But the way he takes on the task force in the third act of this episode was kind of ridiculous. Like, he totally puts himself in a compromised position and does not have the artillery to handle all of these guys, and basically gives himself up in a really stupid, unprepared way. But then it gets laughable in the post-credits scene when he's locked in that cage that Kingpin and the task force put him in, and somehow he's able to trick this guard into shaking his hand, and then he breaks the guy's arm and presumably escapes. Like, really? As for Kingpin, he kind of sits back a lot this episode, and then the power goes out, and then he says, like, he can use that to his advantage or whatever, and then he crushes the head of the commissioner guy and kills him in a really brutal, almost Art the Clown fashion. Oh, and he enacts martial law in New York City with the task force enforcing it. Now, look, I am all for a story on police corruption and tackling that topic, but this whole task force thing where literally every New York cop is just straight up evil is ridiculous. I mean, did we forget about Mahoney from the original Netflix show? I mean, clearly they did. If they didn't bring him back, it would have been nice to see him in a situation like this. Like, at one point we see a cop shoot a looter, and then after he killed him, he pulls the beanie over the dude's face and says, oh no, he wasn't a looter, he was just a vigilante, and I was justified in doing this. And that would be a lot better if all these cops were that type of corrupt, where they do something bad and then Kingpin can blackmail them into doing that. And maybe you get a couple of psychos here or there that are, like, you know, really into this and everything, but the majority of it should be more so like Kingpin has control over the justice system and everyone is kind of bending to his will, instead of just all of them being these incredibly cartoonishly goofy villains who are just, you know, relishing in the torment and execution of so many people who don't deserve it. I wish this could have been presented in a bit more of a realistic light, where they're not constantly branded with visible task force tattoos that, you know, you can't really argue one way or the other of whether or not they're a good person, because the second you get branded with that, immediately you switch to the dark side. I would have preferred if it was more like Daredevil season 3, with the FBI being kind of coerced under the hand of Kingpin. Speaking of, how is it that Ray Nadeem and all of his actions in season 3 just don't even matter anymore? Like, how is Kingpin out of prison? Let alone, how did he even get the option to run for mayor? Realistically, this doesn't make any sense, but it's even more annoying considering the continuity of what happened before. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention that Matt is still recovering from being shot by Bullseye at the start of this episode, and immediately just decides, hey, you know what? I don't need to be in the hospital anymore. I can fight again. I can get back in the suit and be Daredevil again. And I knew this wasn't going to last long term, but it's just stupid that they had to end that episode on that kind of cliffhanger when it didn't make any sense, and we all knew that it wasn't going to affect him at all. Also, yet again, one more episode where Matt doesn't go to a church. Can we just get him back there? It's like they just completely have abandoned every aspect of his faith that was so integral to his character in the original Netflix show. And all this bitterness and darkness within him is honestly not that interesting to watch, because we've already seen him give up being Daredevil twice. We saw it at the beginning of Defenders, when after season 2 he quit being Daredevil, and then in season 3, after Defenders happened and basically almost killed him, he had this crisis of faith where he was just angry with God and struggling, and by the end he came full circle and fully embraced the whole Daredevil persona again. But it was an episode or a season of finding himself as that character, and it was well written and everything. But we're doing it again in this season. We've already seen this done before, much better, and now it's just kind of frustrating watching him not want to be Daredevil for so long, and now when he finally gets back into it, he just feels so not right. Also, it was really stupid how they opened the episode with a flashback of Bullseye accepting Vanessa's offer and then proceed to do absolutely nothing with him throughout the rest of the episode. We get a brief glimpse of where he's at the end, kind of, but they just totally wasted him in this season, and I really wish he was the main focus of the season, as was the plan in the original scripts for Daredevil season 4 before Netflix canceled it, or should I say Disney canceled it, or whoever got it canceled, I don't freaking know. But how they treated Bullseye in this season was not nearly as stupid as how stupid this ending of this episode was. I already mentioned the Punisher post-credit scene, but before that we get Matt and Karen talking about how they need to form an army in order to take on Kingpin and the task force and all that crap, and immediately I'm thinking, oh, here we go. Matt's going to put together a band of vigilantes in New York, and he's going to take it to Kingpin, waging war, and this is going to be epic. Not really. He opens the door, and I immediately start looking around at everyone. I'm like, okay, 2 random female officers I don't know, and Cherry and Josie, and then I froze. Because sitting at the bar is a long-haired woman in a leather jacket, nursing a drink, and I immediately think, is that Jessica Jones? Nope! It was freaking Angie Kim. Why? There were all these rumors about the possibility of the Defenders reuniting at some point in this season. Mike Coulter's main focus post Luke Cage has been this show called Evil, but it recently got canceled, and he's also been flirting with the idea of coming back to Luke Cage if they ever asked him. So everyone thought like, well, maybe, but I don't know. I remember at one point hearing something about Marvel wanting to bring back Finn Jones as Iron Fist and how that could possibly be in the works as well. And while I wasn't totally banking on those two showing up in this show, I was pretty certain, or at least fairly confident, that we would get Jessica Jones back in a brief cameo, because that seemed to be consistent buzz throughout the production of this show, even back when Echo was getting made, how they were talking about possibly bringing back more Defenders characters after they greenlit the return of Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio and John Bernthal. And then again, when Karen and Foggy came back, it only seemed logical that they would start bringing more of them back, and where better place to put them than at the end of this episode when Daredevil starts saying he needs to build an army. Instead, we get all these side characters that nobody cares about, nobody has grown attached to, and it just felt insanely underwhelming. I mean, Daredevil's been on a team of heroes before, and he doesn't reach out to any of them? And if Fisk is enacting martial law in New York City, isn't Spider-Man going to be having something to say about that if vigilantes are suddenly outlawed? After all, Willie referenced him in the first episode of this season. Doctor Strange is in New York too, but if he's off helping with the incursions with Clea, then, you know, at least Wong has to be here, right? And as much as I even hate to mention it, Daredevil does know She-Hulk and presumably formed some sort of connection with Hulk at that family cookout at the end of that show, which was still freaking stupid, but it happened. Daredevil is no longer acting like the Netflix show did, where what happens in the greater Marvel universe doesn't really affect this, and they don't have to worry about that because he doesn't know any of them. We've seen him interact with other characters from the greater Marvel universe, so really they don't have the excuse anymore. Whatever, I'd be shocked if this martial law crap even is referenced in the Thunderbolts movie that we have in a couple of weeks now. Anyway, my main gripes with this episode are just how rushed it was, how inconclusive of an ending it was. Nobody really got a conclusion to their arcs, really. And overall, this just felt so different and so jarring compared to the rest of the other episodes. I wish the characters of this episode were more present throughout the rest of the season. As the second Frank and Karen walk in, it instantly gets better. But this is far from a perfect season, and this episode hardly functions as a finale. I'm just hoping that season 2 feels a lot more consistent and works a lot better under this new creative team. And again, I didn't hate this episode, but it's certainly full of stuff that I can criticize. So for a final score out of 10, I guess I'll give it a 7. And as for a final score of the season overall, averaging all my other scores together, I guess that gives it an 8. Daredevil Born Again, have you watched it yet? What did you think about it? I think I'm going to rewatch it at some point just to see how it holds up on a binge watch, as opposed to waiting around for a new episode every week, and then maybe I'll make a video reassessing and reflecting on that. But until then, I'll direct you to my description if you want more from me in the meantime, where I post tons of reviews that don't always make it onto this channel, and the ones that do make it onto this channel, I always post on those platforms long before I edit together a video. So technically, you're getting early access to some of my thoughts if you really think about it. Comment down below what your thoughts are, good, bad, and ugly. But remember, please don't go at each other's throats about this. This is just a show after all, not the most important thing in the world. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your theories, and more. And until next time, guys, God be with you, and take care.